I realized initially that whoever is going to watch this video who has positive thoughts of the Dunwoody Police Department and is unaware of a lot of the things that have been going on behind the scenes with them ever since their inception in 2009, that initially a lot of what I'm about to say in this particular video is going to sound very defamatory, inflammatory, you name it. The format of this particular video is going to be in a podcast format. There's not going to be yet significant videos. There are going to be significant slides, somewhat of as a slideshow. So I'm going to narrate the slides, and I'm going to give some commentary on additional information about the slides. The reason that this particular video is so important, there's something to be said about the subtle, nuanced psychology that people who pursue a career where they are in some sort of uniform or wearing a badge, and I don't really necessarily want to actually include into that military, because military is a different thing. Military, we send our armed forces to fight in places where they are not the law. It's much more dangerous for a soldier to be placed into a battle zone such as Afghanistan or Baghdad, Iraq, where there are no rules. The rules are whatever happens, happens. But it is interesting that I'm kind of saying it like that, because whenever you think of what is a corrupt police officer, what a corrupt police officer's mentality is that despite the fact that they are not at war, they're not in Iraq, they're not in Afghanistan, they're not anywhere. They are within their own soil. And what a corrupt cop's mentality is one where, despite the fact that they are living within a parameter of law, order, ethics, integrity, justice, you name it, they secretly believe that they are still living in a lawless reality. Everyone else has to live in the lawful reality, but they secretly believe that because they have pursued this career, they are masters of understanding the infrastructure, they're masters at understanding the law, and so they are able to kind of test themselves on whether they can still operate in a duality where they can basically expect everyone else to operate within that set structure of law. But if they know how to go above it, why shouldn't they? It's a dual standard way of operating. And the reason why it's so important to preface this is because, in my particular case, that no one yet knows how severe what they have done to me actually is. The only way that what they did to me and what they're still trying to do to me, they're still trying to target me for their ongoing frame job. Just because I'm no longer in Dunwoody doesn't mean it's stopped. It's still going on. They're still stalking me right now. This is the only reason why I've been left no choice but to make these videos on YouTube. But what I'm saying here in a long-winded way, as usual, is that the only way that these people have been able to be so successful thus far is through this subtlety that I just mentioned a second ago, where human beings want to respect authority. Normal human beings. We want to respect people with the badge. We believe that they took that job for a particular reason. And so when you're dealing with a corrupt police officer, and I'm not just talking about a regular beat cop. I'm not talking about a regular run-of-the-mill corrupt police officer that you would see in the typical shooting online, or in any of these YouTube videos that you see officers being too hasty with their weapon, ending up killing somebody, putting a knee on the neck. All this disgusting stuff is all already obvious. What's not obvious is the element of much higher level senior police officers that if they wanted to engage in their own corruption, they would employ a much more sophisticated thing about taking advantage of people's trust in them. That's what I was getting to. It took me 5 minutes, in the beginning of this whole video. Taking advantage of people's trust and faith in them. Because why? Because they happen to wear a shiny piece of metal on them. And they have been ordained by a government official. And so you believe that because they sought out the shiny metal thing called a badge, and initially they started wearing this thing called a uniform, it's all psychology. You want to believe that a person that pursued this life will always have the utmost of integrity and morality and ethics. Obviously, we've seen that they haven't, but the more dangerous corrupt police officers are not out on the streets. They're not out in patrol cars. They're the ones that are no longer in patrol cars. They're the ones that are at least at minimum sergeant level. Those are uniformed officers, but those are barely potentially corrupt. When you start getting into the lieutenants and the detectives and the chiefs of police, their level of corruption is much harder to prove, or not even prove. It's much harder to influence people to actually see that it's there, because the higher rank, the more you're like, well, that person would never do that. They've been in law enforcement for 15 years. They've been in law enforcement for 20 years. They've been in law enforcement for 30 years. How dare you say such outlandish thing to injure the pedigree of their long track record of protecting and serving? And it's all social engineering. It's all social engineering. What they did to me was entirely relied upon so many people's belief that they would never do something like this. They would never do something like this. The judges believed it. Prosecutors believed it. The FBI believed it. Possibly people at the Department of Justice believed it. And the community that they manipulated believed it. No one knew the underlying motive was that I, Ronen Newmark, had more information to win court cases against them, to win millions of dollars, and to potentially have them investigated themselves, which might lead to not only obviously the loss of their law enforcement careers, but it would land them in prison. In order for that to be averted and stopped, there now needs to become kind of like a status competition. Ronen Newmark is a nobody. Say them. He's a nobody. If we wanted to really frame this guy, it would not be that hard, considering how he is not even something in society to be known about. So if we were to employ this incredibly strategic thing with abusing all of our law enforcement gear, surveillance gear, taxpayer money, resources, you name it, the whole salad, the whole kit and caboodle, there is no way that anyone would believe him over us. He's the nobody. We're the ones with the badges. We're the ones with the networks. We're the ones that people look up to. The community respects us. Nobody in the community knows him. What we're going to do to him is going to be so easy. It's going to be such a cakewalk that even if he were to figure out what we're doing to him, what is he going to do? Go to the FBI? We'll heat him off. We'll heat him off. We'll tell the FBI X, Y, and Z. We'll show the We'll show the FBI this entire montage of all our already pursued false evidence, all of these falsehoods, of this entire paper trail of police reports all over the country using forged and falsified fake screenshots, fake evidence. Like, they literally built this entire fake Trojan horse straw man, plenty of information to overwhelm the mind bullshit, excuse my French, that it is overwhelming when it's coming from people wearing the badges over someone like me. But they don't want anyone to know the underlying thing here is this. They already abused their authority very, very early on with me. it started mostly like 2016, 2017, but I wasn't even a member of, I wasn't even a citizen at that point of Dunwoody when it was 2016, 2017. We'll get to that later. It was how they were involved because my mother's house was in Dunwoody for 20 some odd years. And when I became a notable person on a very controversial and now kind of defunct underground social media platform called Zello, Zello, not Zillow, the real estate website, Zello. When I became a high profile, we'll say, individual on that application, I was surrounded by a lot of very unstable people who were jealous of my notoriety. They doxed me, they cyberstalked me, they looked up my information, they tried to get me fired from jobs, they recorded my voice out of context, you name it, they've done it. That was their shtick. But the crazy thing that ended up happening in the beginning was, since they weren't able to find my original address where I lived at that time in 2016, when this really escalated, I was living in Alpharetta, Georgia. They couldn't find a lock initially on that address of mine in Alpharetta, Georgia in 2016. So what do I have of my own recordings, not edited and not chopped up, but completely unmessed with recordings? I have recordings of certain Zello Cyberstalkers on that app from 2016 saying that it would be better to attack my mother's house in Dunwoody, Georgia, who's never been on Zello. It would be better to attack, harass, cyberstalk, and target harassment to her house in Dunwoody, where I don't even live, than to try to find where I live and harass me, because it's basically taking her hostage. It's taking her hostage. It's better to do things to my mother so that it would cause a greater level of damage in my life, and I have these recordings where the person said that it would cause more damage to me if these gang cyberstalkers from Zello would attack what they perceived was my closest relationship, would be my mother. Imagine that. Imagine in real life what we would call a person that says that if they have a beef with you. Imagine if it was a bar. Imagine if you go to a bar and there's a group of unstable people at the corner of the bar, and they see all the accolades, they're seeing all the love, they're seeing all the popularity that you're getting. Imagine them saying to themselves, it's better to go and find where this person's mother lives and target his mother because we don't like him. Imagine how psychotic that sounds in the real world. Well, it actually also sounds, on the internet pretty psychotic. But what Dunwoody Police had shown from 2016, and don't get me wrong, I'm going to get to this in a second. Initially, the very, very, very first detective that my mother had been assigned with, Detective Anthony Stallings, he was pretty decent. And I'm getting ahead of myself. But because of the complications and why we didn't pursue things at that time in 2016, my mother and I both decided to kind of withdraw. One of the assailants that was attacking and harassing her at that time, he apologized. We thought it wouldn't get any worse. Boy, were we wrong. Only after that first instance with Detective Anthony Stallings, Dunwoody Police Detective Anthony Stallings, he's not even there anymore. He's gone. He's left somewhere else. Only after that instance where nothing was done about it, partially because of my fault, I was asked to come down to Dunwoody, and I'll give for the people listening, I'll give you exactly the reason why I didn't go into Dunwoody at that time. At that time, I was living with a person, which we'll find out later on, that was from Zello as well. I entered into a live-in romantic relationship with a person from Zello. And my name was already doxxed and cyberstalked and, released to the public, and hers wasn't. And they really, these gang stalkers, they really lusted after this woman that I was with, and they actually further attacked me anytime they even had a disagreement with her on the microphone on Zello, because Zello is a live chat, live talk, live conversation app. So when when this was going on in 2016, and I was, asked by Detective Anthony Stallings, hey, this is really bizarre. Like, why are people attacking your mom at Dunwoody? You don't even live in our jurisdiction anymore. You're over in Alpharetta. Like, what's going on here? Can you come down and make all this, understandable? Because by that time, I already had the recordings of the people that were harassing my mother. They would basically call her up, harass her. They would stream the phone calls when they're making harassing phone calls to her late at night, and stuff like that. They would stream the call of them harassing my mother. They would stream it into Zello like it was like fun, like it was funny. So yeah, at that time, 2016, this is unheard of, even to like local law enforcement. So Detective Anthony Stallings asked me, hey, can you come down? Initially, I said, yeah, I'm definitely going to come down. And then I was like, wait a second. These cyberstalkers are addicted and obsessed to running Freedom of Information Act requests from police departments so that they can harvest more information from the police reports, such as phone numbers and addresses, in order to know more information to attack their target and their extended, families with. And that's what I was. I can't even speak. I'm getting like worked up even having to access this memory back in my mind, because it was like a long time ago, 2016. It's now 2023. This is how long it's been going on. And it's like invoking emotions in me where like even having to talk about it's kind of getting me upset. So I was told, come down to Dunwoody, whatever. I ended up not going. Now I remember. The reason I didn't go is because I was so guarded over that person's information. The person that I was in a live-in relationship with, a woman who came from Zello as well. We were both on Zello every day. And these gang stalkers hated the both of us. They hated me and this person. But because my name was exposed and her name was protected, because only I knew her name, nobody else at that time knew her name, I said to myself, wait a second, if I go to Dunwoody and I start, giving all these statements and my name is going to now be included into the report, now the officer, Detective Stallings, is going to want my address. At that time, I didn't even know anything about Marcy's Law. For the people who don't know what Marcy's Law is, I don't even know if Marcy's Law was a thing in 2016. Long story short, Marcy's Law is something that I could have invoked at that time and said, hey, I'll come down, I'll tell you what's going on, but I don't want my address in Alpharetta being visible to anyone or anything on these police reports, because these psychos on Zello will simply do a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. They will get my information of where I live in Alpharetta, and then they're going to start attacking us in Alpharetta, me and my girlfriend at that time. And then they're going to find out because my girlfriend has mail going to her at that address. That's this whole thing. That's the whole reason I didn't go, because I was protecting my partner back then. Boy, oh boy, how ironic. We'll later on find out that I was guarding the name of my ex-partner back then, so that Zello Gang Cyberstalkers can't attack her life, her family, harass her, get her fired from, like all the things that they were doing to me, tampering with every element of my life. I didn't want that for her. So this is why I kind of withdrew from going to Dunwoody Police at that time in 2016. What that resulted was a very strange thing that later on, when more attacks and more harassment was targeting my mother's house in Dunwoody, Dunwoody Police's tunes started changing. And it started changing with the newer detective that was assigned to my mother's newer cases, when she was still getting harassed. When she was still getting harassed, there were people making threats to come, to her house, drive to her house from other states. There were threats, of burning houses down. There were threats being made that they wanted to, force me to come to my mother's Dunwoody. And these people from Zello, they said this one particular person that had a police report on him in either late 2016 or somewhere early 2017. I don't remember the exact year. But he basically said that he wanted to fight me. He wanted to challenge me to a fight. And he didn't know where I lived, and I didn't really care to fight him, because he lost arguments to me on the microphone. So he said that basically, if I won't meet him, then he's going to force his way to my mother's address. He's going to get in his car, he's going to drive from Florida, and he's go to my mother's house, and he's going to cause some sort of something at my mother's house, knock on her door, cause some sort of commotion, make some sort of threat. And if I didn't then drive to my mother's house to stop what he's threatening to do, then I'm chicken shit and I'm a coward and that I don't want to protect my mother. And it's like, but what do you have against my mother? Like, you have an issue with me. You want to, not one. I want an argument with you. You lost an argument. But now, I don't care about his mother. I don't care about his father. I don't care about his family. But again, this is where this creepy stuff was leading to. And Dunwoody Police changed their tune. Why did they change their tune? My opinion is all of the other things that were going on with Dunwoody Police from the very beginning. From 2009, when they started becoming a police department, all the way to the present, there has always been, in my opinion, rotten roots of this police department. Rotten. No matter how, and I want to actually, before I say what I was about to say, I want to actually preface something when I'm saying this. The city of Dunwoody, the people of Dunwoody, the community of Dunwoody are great. They are amazing. All the more reason why, if a few inner-circled, corrupt law enforcement people are able to get positions of leadership into a town that they police, where the town itself is good, how much easier is it for corrupt police officers to hide and cloak themselves within the nice community that they claim to serve and protect? This is another element here that is uncomfortable and actually would most likely be angering for the corrupt police officers at Dunwoody Police to have me say on the internet. Okay? But that is the truth. That is the truth. And I don't mind being sued for defamation of character to say, for me to say this, because I can prove it in a court of law. Okay? What took place with this police department from the inception in 2009? There was always a concealed level of corruption from the beginning. And anytime it kind of bubbled up to the surface and it made its way to the news every once in a while, there were always these maneuvers and tactics to try to keep it under wraps. And, just hopefully no one will take too much notice. Let's keep on going. Let's keep on doing things until something else happens. And something else happens. And something else happens. And something else happens. And before you know it, it's not even something else happens when it comes to, people suing them. It's even their own junior officers calling out the corruption. And now their own junior officers are suddenly, the bad guys themselves. So this is where we're going with this. This has been a 23-minute monologue. This is going to be a bumpy ride. Let's go. So as I mentioned, this is going to be a slideshow narrated video. This slideshow right now that you're seeing, or this portion of the slideshow, is going to be a timeline of all of the particular things since the inception of Dunwoody Police in 2009 that have gone on. Now I know what some people may think. Well, Ronen, many different police departments have every once in a while something come up, right? And that is true. But there's a particular need to emphasize that as you look at the beginning of this timeline here, within 2 years of this police department's birth, from 2009, already in information on the case by the Department of Justice against previous Dunwoody detective Robert Bentivegna, already 2 years in, a high-ranking officer in the detective unit is already breaking the law. Just 2 years after the beginning of the police department. And again, I know some people would say, well, lone wolf, bad apple. All right, that doesn't speak for the department. Okay. We'll get to that in a second. In fact, let's start reading the timeline so that it will start to kind of explain itself. Okay, 2009. Dunwoody Police is born, goes live April 1. 2011. I'm going to read it with you. In case there's people right now that are watching these slideshows and your screen, you may not have it on full screen. We'll read it. I'll narrate it with you. Let's go. Let's do this. 2011, Detective Robert Bentivegna of Dunwoody Police begins to secretly give away intel from law enforcement databases to a person with known criminal ties. Known, not no, but known. I just couldn't fit in the little section there. But it was known that this particular person had criminal ties. This is writing again from certain investigational notes, certain things that can be found online. This person had criminal ties, and Robert Bentivegna gave this person access or knowledge of things pertaining to possible warrants of other people, if that person had a warrant or not. Detective Bentivegna would be able to provide that information in exchange for kickbacks. What are those kickbacks? Airline tickets, cars, stuff like that. Okay. It started in 2011, and Department of Justice finally prosecuted him in 2015, 3 years later. I want to say what I want to say about that, but I'm going to keep on going. 2013, Officer Dale Laskowski engages in conduct that leads to 4 separate lawsuits over a span of 3 years, relating to unconstitutional search or detention. In certain times, it was just search and not detention, and sometimes in other instances, where the lawsuits wrote or showed that it was both an unlawful search and detention of a suspect, and the improper calling of a K-9 unit. Dunwoody Police at the time didn't even have K-9 units. Officer Dale Laskowski wanted to call another neighboring police department's K-9 unit to come to his stops. In that particular case, right there with Officer Dale Laskowski, it was the one instance where it was a regular uniformed cop, not a higher-ranking cop, that was doing unlawful things. And yes, I say unlawful things because just because lawsuits get settled doesn't mean that the person didn't do unlawful things. And when I say unlawful things, when you're violating the Fourth Amendment rights of somebody, you are doing unlawful things. Okay? Those lawsuits were settled. And don't know where Officer Dale Laskowski is right now. There's not really that much information. Didn't really bother to dig in that deep. I want to keep going. 2016. Detective Caleb Gilbert installs multiple video cameras in a private apartment in Dunwoody to illegally observe and record multiple people having sex without proper approval of a judge. I actually want to kind of correct that little slide. While a detective may be able to watch someone have sex and it may not maybe be illegal under an investigation, if they are observing them having sex through a camera that they weren't allowed to even legally install, then it technically is observation and recording that is not technically legal. Okay? So yeah, multiple people having sex without proper approval of a judge. DeKalb County Superior Court judge at that time, Judge Gail Flake, at that particular trial, and that's why I placed 2016, because the 2016 date here doesn't necessarily actually specify whether this is the first instance of when these illegal cameras were placed into apartments to watch people having sex. But the court case was in 2016 when DeKalb County Judge Gail Flake later threw out the evidence at that time. It is unknown if secret copies of these sex tapes were ever made by Dunwoody cops or ever shared elsewhere. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. You have a police department that by 2016, you already see one of them already was federally prosecuted for giving away access to databases that he wasn't supposed to. Another one habitually violated the Fourth Amendment rights of people he was conducting stops with. And so I'm sorry to be a little bit about this, but considering the code of conduct thus far, one can't help but wonder what happened to all those tapes of all those people having sex. Hopefully there weren't any copies made, and hopefully there wasn't like a chuckle, ha ha, he inside Dunwoody Police, that despite them not being allowed to do it, and despite Detective Caleb Gilbert not having faced any consequences for having done so, I hope that senior officers weren't having a secret good old laugh at watching people have sex, at night, and then going in the day to the courtroom and then saying, Your Honor, this is just really good evidence for the case. I'm hoping that there wasn't any sort of indulgence in having illegally filmed people having sex while you were supposed to be conducting an investigation on them, is basically what I'm saying. Who knows? We don't know. Let's continue. Here we go, next slide, also in 2016. I'm going to read the first sentence and then I'm going to stop for a moment. 2016, junior officer Roger Halstead claims a pattern of sexual harassment began by senior officer Dunwoody Police, Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza, who began to solicit Halstead for photos of his private parts. Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza himself sent unsolicited sexual photos and sexual acts to Halstead. I'm going to pause right there. So what we have here is we have a junior officer who is claiming sexual harassment against a senior officer, a lieutenant. The nature of that is the senior lieutenant begins to both solicit the junior officer for nudes, as well as sending the junior officer nudes. Didn't we just go from a previous slide where a detective, Caleb Gilbert, was having his evidence thrown out by a superior court judge for filming people have sex? And now we're going to another situation around the same time where a lieutenant, not a detective, but both of them are senior officers. A lieutenant a lieutenant is being accused by a lower ranking officer of sexual deviancy. So we have in the previous slide a detective completely being okay to, because it was a very special case. I read the notes online. It was a very, very special case about prostitution that Detective Caleb Gilbert in the previous slide is a very complex prostitution ring investigation, which is why it warranted to illegally film people having sex. And I questioned it a second ago, were the tapes shared amongst the inner circle at Dunwoody Police? Inner circle being high-ranking people, not low-ranking people. I don't know. But it is kind of strange that when we go from one issue having to do with sex, now there's another issue having to do with sex with an entirely different senior officer. Let's continue. Officer Roger Halstead later states in court documents suing the city of Dunwoody in 2020, he only initially went along with Espinoza's coercion for sexual photos due to veiled threats made by Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza that Roger Halstead would be targeted for mistreatment if he didn't reciprocate. He being junior officer at that time, Roger Halstead. What are we saying? If the junior officer didn't comply, there would be consequences. That's his words, not mine. And junior, at that time, Dunwoody officer Roger Halstead later tried to switch to the day shift to avoid Lieutenant Espinoza, and noticed the daytime supervisor extended the mistreatment against junior officer Roger Halstead, giving indication that senior Dunwoody officer at that time, Lieutenant Espinoza, may have pulled strings with other senior officers to intimidate Roger Halstead into returning back to Lieutenant Espinoza's command, where more sexual harassment could potentiate. Later on, as Halstead did voice this from what I read in his lawsuit, Officer Roger Halstead was bullied into transferring to the next door neighboring police department in the town of Brookhaven, Georgia, Brookhaven Police Department, where he was fired just days later. In the court paperwork that I'm not showing here, I've read the court paperwork that Officer Roger Halstead had filed suing the city of Dunwoody. He essentially explained that Lieutenant Espinoza had friends at Brookhaven Police Department, high-ranking friends. And it, again, his words, not mine, paraphrasing, he basically said it was a setup. He feels, Roger Halstead, he feels that because Dunwoody didn't have enough to fire him on, and that would have created a big mess, that to make Officer Roger Halstead pay for speaking out, the retaliation came in the form of tricking Roger Halstead to leave Dunwoody so that Dunwoody Police, so that the mistreatment would stop, and that the mistreatment would not exist in the neighboring police department at the city of Brookhaven, Georgia. But because there's a buddy-buddy system here between senior officers at Dunwoody and senior officers at Brookhaven, it didn't matter. One call, yada, 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 and now the senior people at Brookhaven Police Department are doing a favor. This is according, again, to the paperwork allegations of the lawsuit that Officer Roger Halstead filed against the Dunwoody Police Department. That for something arbitrary, something trivial, and something entirely invented, again, his words, not mine, Officer Roger Halstead said that he was fired very shortly after moving to Brookhaven Police Department, and he suspects that it was all a setup. And what I mean by setup? Retaliation. Retaliation why? Retaliation why? How dare Officer Roger Halstead call out a senior officer, sending him nudes and asking him for nudes, to the point that the man was trying to move away from the command of Espinoza to a different shift, and that didn't work out. Wow, I mean, it's crazy. Just because the man doesn't want to send another man nudes, now if he dares speak about it, now his entire law enforcement career needs to be attacked, retaliated on. Let's continue. Also 2016. It's amazing, all this stuff was going on in 2016 inside the Dunwoody Police at the exact same time that I was being gang cyberstalked by gang cyberstalker people at the social media platform that I mentioned before called Zello. The exact same time that I was having my life attacked and my mother's house became the target in Dunwoody of harassment and cyberstalking as well. When all of that stuff was happening to me, all of this stuff was happening to these people who actually even work for the Dunwoody Police as junior or lesser ranking officers, non-sergeants, non-detectives. The exact same time. 2016. Exact same time. I'm getting my life attacked. My mom is getting prostitutes sent to her door at night by people from Zello. Pizza orders unordered, cash on delivery, harassing phone calls late at night, people saying they're going to come to to my mother's house in Dunwoody to, confront her, to threaten her, all the sorts of stuff, right? All of that was going on while this was going on. Let's continue. Dunwoody officer at that time, Chris Valente, also files an internal complaint against Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza. Wow, another complaint. Let's find out for what. Citing that when Officer Valente asked Lieutenant Espinoza to a sought-after assignment, Lieutenant Espinoza responded with a statement that another officer would get the role over Officer Chris Valente. Why? This is what Officer Chris Valente said that Fidel Espinoza said. Officer Chris Valente said that Lieutenant Espinoza said because the other officer performs oral sex better than Officer Chris Valente does. Clearly, obviously, there wasn't any sort of sexual interaction or affair or anything like that between Chris Valente and Fidel Espinoza. It was, an off-the-cuff thing. But it was still kind of like a wink-wink quid pro quo. Again, these are the assertions of Officer Chris Valente, what he wrote, what he said. I'm just commenting on what he said. Let's continue. After Chris Valente filed the complaint about the incident, other senior Dunwoody officers dismissed the complaint. Senior officers who? Who do you think? The top person at the department. We'll get to that in a second. Other senior Dunwoody officers dismissed the complaint, taking Lieutenant Espinoza's side, as he simply denied making the comment at all to Officer Chris Valente. If it can't be proven, never happened, right? It's not like Officer Chris Valente in this particular instance was walking around recording Espinoza saying that the work assignment would not be given to Officer Chris Valente and be given to somebody else because the other person can give oral sex better. It's not like Officer Chris Valente was walking around with a recorder at that time. So if it wasn't recorded, Espinoza can simply say, sorry, prove it, never happened. And that was good enough for senior officers at Dunwoody Police. Well, who's actually a senior officer above Lieutenant Espinoza? Who's above Lieutenant Espinoza? The Chief of Police. Let's continue. Later, Officer Chris Valente decided to voluntarily seek a new police job elsewhere. Very smart, Officer Valente. Very, very smart of you. Dunwoody Police made a private agreement with Officer Chris Valente, unknown still to this day in full detail, leading to having Officer Chris Valente, I'm laughing because of what's about to come because it's all factual, leading to having Officer Chris Valente's, leading to having Chris Valente sign a contract to not be allowed to ever sue Dunwoody, and was paid $10 at the conclusion of the agreement when the agreement was signed. What's going on there? That you have a junior officer accusing, again, the same senior officer of weird sexual conduct. And basically, the junior officer agrees to sign an agreement not to sue the city of Dunwoody. Why would there need to be an agreement between the city of Dunwoody Police, and an officer that's about to leave where he promises not to sue? And the $10 payment is really just to kind of make it like nominally official legally. Okay. $10 thing is trivial. It's unknown. I'm continuing to read. It's unknown if Officer Chris Valente was afraid of being blackballed by Dunwoody PD when seeking a new job elsewhere, and why he signed the agreement. Well, I mean, is that plausible? That Officer Chris Valente was afraid, maybe? I mean, it's not like the previous slide was saying anything about another junior officer being terrified of retaliatory measures for simply having called out a senior officer, and the retaliation comes in the form of having their job and their career ruined, their law enforcement career. So I'll tell you what I think happened in this particular case is Chris Valente saw the writing on the wall and said, you know what? If I were to whistleblow too hard, or if, they think that I might sue them, then they're going to try to blackball me like I think they're blackballing other people. What is the real point here why I'm speaking so slowly about this is there's a pattern here of not only misconduct on the part of senior officers, but now this type of misconduct where it's like junior cop versus senior cop, the junior cops are kind of basically revealing that there's a fear of revenge. But, high level officers who are at the lieutenant and chief of police level, they have plenty of integrity and ethics to never want to seek revenge on a junior officer simply because they're calling out what they see. It's weird. It's almost like there's now becoming a track record where revenge on people doing the right thing is commonplace. It's acceptable. Let's continue. So now we skip over to 2020. And it's not to say that anything didn't happen from 2016 to 2020. These slides are still being generated from information that is verifiable online, being court paperwork, statements that were made by different people that were quoted by vetted news organizations and news articles. So yeah, it doesn't mean that anything didn't happen between 2016 and 2020. It's just this was a landmark date that you can prove that something was said. So let's begin. 2020, Officer Austin Handel, Dunwoody Police at that time. Officer Austin Handel begins to voice his own contention regarding Lieutenant Fidel Espinosa's pattern of sexually harassing multiple Dunwoody officers. Officer Brian Bolden, another officer, is also referenced, claiming Officer Brian Bolden was also sexually harassed by Senior Lieutenant Fidel Espinosa, starting as early as 2014, when conversations arose in relation to work assignment advancements. We just read previously Officer Chris Valente say the same thing. So now, what is it? Is it two officers lying? Junior officers lying about the senior officer? It's right there. Brian Bolden also said that Senior Lieutenant Fidel Espinosa connected together conversations about lucrative work assignments, side jobs, side whatever. I don't know if it was security. I don't know what it was. But anytime that was brought up, again, the quid pro quo thing that Officer Brian Bolden was saying that Espinosa said to him was, you give me what I want and I'm going to give you what you wanted. I don't know exactly how, but I do know that it's verifiable that Brian Bolden also said that work assignments and work assignment advancements were connected with sexual dialogue. Nasty. During this time, Officer Austin Handel was complained against for having sped and used or using lights and sirens in order to not be late for work, and was ultimately fired by claims he was not honest about the occurrence. Officer Austin Handel claims the severity of him being fired over the matter was cloaked retaliation for having spoken out about Espinoza not being properly investigated for numerous sexual harassment complaints. Now, before I continue with the last sentence there, I want to kind of like pause there and unpack all of that. Okay, Officer Austin Handel, whether he may have or may have not used lights and sirens, I believe that there was video footage, something like that. He might have been nervous when asked about it, felt embarrassed. But they're basically saying, the seniors at Dunwoody Police, they're saying that is a fireable offense. When you find out what these people did to me, to try to frame me, to try to plant evidence on me, to try to illegally stalk me, to try to do everything in the book and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of wasted taxpayer money, I don't think that what the senior officers at Dunwoody Police are okay with doing equates to a junior cop running late for work and making a mistake and using lights and sirens. It's hypocritical. Hypocrisy is like not even the word to describe that they, again, remember what I said in the beginning of this video, they live according to two sets of rules together. You're not allowed to break the law. You're not allowed to do something wrong, but they are. Because they have a higher level than you, and they know how to manipulate the law better than you. So in this case, what Officer Austin Handel is basically saying is right there. They found something to fire him over because he also joined the voices of the Espinoza issue, sexual harassment, asking for nudes, stuff like that. Again, this is a third example here of someone perceiving the actions of senior Dunwoody officers as being retaliatory and revenge-oriented. Revenge. Let's continue. Officer Bolden, Brian Bolden, the secondary officer mentioned in this particular slide, echoing Officer Austin Handel's claims, became worried he too would eventually be targeted for what? A staged, retaliatory, revenge-oriented investigation in order to also be revenge fired. Not my words, Officer Brian Bolden's words. Let's continue. If you're exhausted by now, I understand. This is exhausting. Wait until you see how much... Anyway, I'm going to continue to not get sidetracked. Next slide. 2020. Another officer. Dunwoody Police Officer Brian Castellanos. Hopefully I'm saying that last name correctly. I don't want to butcher that because it's disrespectful. Officer Brian Castellanos. It's a cool name. Officer Brian Castellanos joins the outing of who? Again, Senior Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza's sexual harassment, claiming he too began to be a target of senior officer at Dunwoody, Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza, starting 2017 till 2020. Sorry to mess up my voice inflection, because this is just draining to even read this and talk about it. It's gross. Officer Brian Castellanos proceeds to file an intent to sue the city of Dunwoody over it. Officer Brian Castellanos also provides proof that Espinoza texted Officer Brian Castellanos sexually inappropriate messages, including photos of Espinoza's own genitalia, requested nudes from Officer Castellanos, and made suggestive, inappropriate commentary in connection to what? To request to get additional work assignments. Wow. Another officer saying the same thing. Officer Brian Castellanos eventually files civil suit in 2022, also complaining of Espinoza. This is the grossest part of this slide. This particular way, not the grossest part of the whole thing. This is just the grossest part of just this particular slide. Also complaining of Espinoza attempting to engage in sexual communication with Brian Castellanos' own wife. Wow. And Espinoza, and here's where it gets even nastier. And Espinoza taking photos of Castellanos using the bathroom without Castellanos' consent. Didn't we already cover the usage of cameras from back in 2016 with Detective Caleb Gilbert placing cameras in apartments to watch people having sex? Wow, so in this situation, it's not just mere sexual harassment claims like the other officers. In this case, this junior officer, I don't want to say junior like he's junior, but at that time, potentially, junior to compare to the senior rank that Espinoza had. This officer, Brian Castellanos, said it wasn't just attempted solicitation for nudes in connection to job work assignments, but it was an additional thing here where there was sexual dialogue with the man's wife and taking photos of the man going to the bathroom. What happened? That's literally, like, imagine anyone else. Imagine anybody else who's not a cop going into the bathroom and taking a picture of someone going to the bathroom. Imagine the question of whether they would be able to get away with that criminally and not be charged, arrested. Did the senior officer get arrested for this? No. Let's continue. 2022 as well. Officer Brian Bolden learns of the second DUI of Dunwoody Police's Public Information Officer, Sergeant Robert Parsons. Now we have an issue between Brian Bolden, who previously whistle blew Fidel Espinoza's sexual harassment, and now Brian Bolden noticed another form of misconduct by not a lieutenant, but still someone higher ranking than them at the sergeant level, in this case being Sergeant Robert Parsons. So when Officer Bolden realizes this, he decides to head to DeKalb County Jail, to obtain Sergeant Robert Parsons' mugshot for the proof of the arrest, and turns the findings over to the media. As the story breaks publicly in Atlanta, Chief Billy Grogan places, I'm laughing because this is so crazy, Chief Billy Grogan places who on paid leave? Did he place on paid leave the guy who got a DUI? That's not what I read. Could be wrong. Chief Billy Grogan places Officer Brian Bolden on paid leave pending an investigation against him, as Bolden is accused of, quote, violating Dunwoody Police's public criticism policy. Now, I want to pause on that as well. I want to pause real quick. How many police departments in the nation have violating... how many... You get where I'm going with this. How many police departments in the nation have policies about public criticism where you're basically told that is part of your employment with that police department. You have to agree contractually or something like that to an agreement where you're not allowed to publicly criticize them. How does that jive with the First Amendment? How does that, listen, I get it. I understand, confidentiality agreements. That's different. You're not supposed to reveal things that could, for example, if, let's say you work at Apple, you're not supposed to reveal tech specs of the upcoming iPhone. You're not supposed to reveal trade secrets if you're working for somewhere. But how does that compute with your First Amendment rights for freedom of speech when a police department is so afraid that you'll find something wrong that's going on in their department that you are a horrible person for simply speaking out about it, invoking your First Amendment rights as a U.S. citizen? Who came up with this policy in Dunwoody Police that officers are not allowed to publicly criticize? What are they scared of? What are they scared of? Think about that. Why would a police department need to force their officers to sign an agreement that says that they're not allowed to publicly criticize the department? Basically, in order to be a police officer at Dunwoody Police, you have to be willing to have a gag order over your mouth the whole time. So if you see something wrong, you're not allowed to talk about it. Otherwise, you're breaking the policy. What kind of integrity exists in a police department like that, where cops aren't even allowed to talk out loud about something they see that's wrong? What does that say about the integrity of the department? Think about it. Think about it. Who set this rule up, and who does it benefit, and who does it victimize? Let's continue. Instead of condemnation against Sergeant Parsons' own actions for getting the DUI and being arrested for a second DUI time, I'm sorry, I'm speaking over my own words. Instead of condemnation against Sergeant Parsons' own actions and being arrested for a second time for a DUI, Brian Bolden instead was the one condemned for having brought it to the public awareness. Bolden was eventually fired as he became suspicious this may have been the excuse that Dunwoody Police was looking for to revenge fire him for joining the outing of Lieutenant Espinosa's sexual harassment conduct previous to this, and Chief Billy Grogan siding with Espinosa at that time in most of the complaints made against Espinosa. So what are we really saying here is that, just like the previous officers who did speak out loud, Brian Bolden said, "Oh crap, I spoke the truth twice." Brian Bolden spoke the truth twice. The first time was against the sexually harassing lieutenant. And then he spoke the truth the second time by simply saying, hey, one of our sergeants just got a second DUI. So Brian Bolden, the guy who spoke the truth twice, ended up getting fired. Well, did Espinosa get fired for sexually harassing anyone? Now you're starting to see a track record here of the ethics of the leadership of Dunwoody Police. The ethics, the integrity, the conscience, the right versus wrong of the highest level people that run this ship called the Dunwoody Police. It started from 2011 when a detective said to themselves, Robert Bentivegna, it's no biggie. He can access law enforcement databases and give the data over to criminals. Well, why did he feel so confident back then? Back in 2011 when he did it, and then finally was prosecuted for in 2015. Now in 2022 in this slide, that's a long time. That's over a decade. where we still see a track record here of senior officers really not being condemned, criticized, spoken out against. No, it's the junior officers that are calling things out, that are the bad guys, that have to lose their jobs, that have to get their records scarred up, that have to be humiliated and embarrassed the next time that they want to file an application at another police department, where now they have to, under their breath, and control their emotions and know that it's unfair, that they simply did the right thing, and now they have to defend their image because someone else higher than them, with a nicer name next to their name, with a nicer status, with something not saying officer so-and-so, but something that says chief so-and-so, or lieutenant so-and-so, or sergeant so-and-so, those guys get to be right, says who? Let's continue. And here we move away from the timeline to the stats. 14-year known-of stats since Dunwoody Police Department's inception in 2009, under the sole leadership of only one police chief, Chief Billy Grogan, William Grogan. Let's look at the stats. None of this is false. None of these are lies. Fact-checked. Fact-check me all you want, people. Fact-check this. First instance, illegal access and abuse of law enforcement data. Dunwoody Detective Robert Bentivegna. I looked for any public condemnation by Chief Billy Grogan about that. Couldn't find it. I welcome anybody to see if you can find anything that shows that when the Department of Justice was saying that this instance of what Robert Bentivegna did was a disgrace to the badge, I looked to see if Chief Billy Grogan echoed the Department of Justice's condemnation. Didn't hear anything. Didn't see anything on the news, nothing online. Number 2, illegal search and detention of suspects leads to 4 civil rights lawsuits against Dunwoody officer Dale Laskowski. Where's the public condemnation from Chief Billy Grogan? Couldn't find it. Couldn't find it. Number 3, illegal filming of suspects having sex without judge approval. Dunwoody Detective Caleb Gilbert. After DeKalb County Superior Court Judge Gail Flake threw out the evidence, it made the news. Where's the condemnation? Couldn't find it. Couldn't find it. Let's continue. Number 4, lewd sexual harassment claims made by 5 total other police officers against Dunwoody Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza. Not only was there no condemnation by Chief Billy Grogan against Dunwoody Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza, but instead of condemnation, Chief Billy Grogan conducted his wink-wink investigation, because there is no internal affairs department at the Dunwoody Police. Chief Billy Grogan is the internal affairs department of the Dunwoody Police. So instead of condemning the acts of a senior lieutenant, he ran the investigation against Dunwoody Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza on the claims of sexual harassment in a manner where his report showed that because some of the officers responded, that they showed consent. What other police department in the country would, this is mind-boggling, what other chief of police in the country would say something like that? Meaning, like, regardless of whether you can slant it like a criminal. It's almost like basically Chief Billy Grogan became Fidel Espinosa's criminal defense attorney as a police chief. Your Honor, my client didn't conduct sexual harassment because the other junior officers responded and indicated they were willing participants. Well, that's the whole point. They were being bullied into responding until they didn't feel comfortable anymore and it grossed them out. Instead of condemnation, there was dismissal. And in addition to dismissal, that last section down at the bottom, fostering a cloaked pattern of ends justifying the means policing, where laws can be violated as long as you don't get caught. If you get caught, then off-ramps are put into place to minimize the legal ramifications for cops as long as they don't out any other cop. Let's look at these off-ramps that I'm talking about. The first one here, the first officer that's in this slide, didn't necessarily have an off-ramp. He didn't have a choice. Detective Robert Bentivegna, out of the four instances here mentioned, Robert Bentivegna didn't have a choice because he was federally prosecuted. Chief Billy Grogan couldn't give him an off-ramp, is what I'm trying to say here. He couldn't give him an out because the Department of Justice wouldn't give the man an out, the Robert Bentivegna. So there's nothing that Billy Grogan could have done for Robert Bentivegna. The best that he could do is just not say anything negative about him out in public, which I don't see that he did. Now let's look at the other three in this situation. Dale Laskowski. If anyone out there in the interwebs wants to research if this guy is still in law enforcement, if his record has at all been, messed with, his police record, preventing him from being able to work as a law enforcement officer. I haven't been able to get that far because, frankly, I don't have the time. But I haven't been able to see anything. My initial, probing into that, I could not find anything. It didn't make enough of the news with these 4 civil lawsuits so that you can't really tell if he was secretly, like the other two I'm about to get to, able to just resign without any other consequences to his record, his police record. The next person, Detective Caleb Gilbert, from what I saw, did resign. Could be wrong. He just happened to leave. Not only did he leave the Dunwoody Police, I believe, I might be wrong, fact check me on this, he left the state of Georgia and went off elsewhere outside of the state to be a law enforcement officer outside of the state. I believe maybe Massachusetts, possibly, don't quote me on it. So there is an off-ramp there. If you remember what I mentioned about Detective Caleb Gilbert back in 2016, the man had his evidence thrown out. And like I said, if anyone else who's not law enforcement would have placed a video camera inside of any apartment for any reason to watch people have sex, would that person go to prison? Would that person be accused of having committed a felony offense? Of course they would. But how convenient that not only was there no condemnation by Chief Billy Grogan on one of his senior Dunwoody detectives filming people having sex. We don't know if the tapes were shared amongst people. We have no idea. But what we do know is that nothing really ever happened in terms of any consequences to the guy. He was able to resign, leave quietly, leave the state of Georgia in what I believe, and went on his merry way to continue to do whatever he wanted to do in law enforcement without anything in his record being affected. And it would actually, without not only just the record, without anyone in Georgia at any higher authority than the Dunwoody Police to be able to even investigate him. Not being investigated by the GBI, essentially is what I'm saying. That would have been a GBI case to investigate Caleb Gilbert on a felony charge of illegally video recording people in a private place having sex. Nothing happened. And then we come to Lieutenant Espinoza, who also, at the conclusion of this botched wink investigation, this Mickey Mouse investigation that Billy Grogan ran on his own buddy, Fidel Espinoza, when there was no wrongdoing found because the other junior officers were allegedly, responding to Espinoza, so there's no wrongdoing. He too was also allowed to resign without any additional consequences, without any additional investigation, and flee over to Florida, away from Georgia jurisdiction. It's amazing. All these people that could have been able to be investigated for different things, taking photos of people in bathrooms is what Espinoza also did. It's not my words. He took photos of another junior officer going to the bathroom. That's also a felony, just like Detective Caleb Gilbert was videotaping people having sex in an apartment. It's crazy. Like, all these senior level people were all allowed to go scot-free. But the junior officers who were whistleblowing sexual harassment, they were cited for, outing another officer's DUI. That's fireable. Lights and sirens to help the person go to work faster because they're running late. That's fireable. But no, taking pictures of people in the bathroom, that's not fireable. Videotaping people having sex, that's not fireable. Who's running the ethics department of this police department? Who's running the ethics train? Who's deciding what's right and wrong in this police department? Let's continue. And now we come to the slide of the outcomes of the 5 junior officers who whistleblew Senior Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza. It's a good snapshot here because, again, there's so much that's happened that these aggregated slides are the best way to actually really just kind of like quickly consume the realization of how many good people had their lives messed with, while the bad people were able to get away scot-free. Roger Halstead, number 1. These are all previous, the junior officers, the previous junior officers. All of these people already left the Dunwoody Police Department. Number 1, Roger Halstead sued Dunwoody, claims to have been falsely targeted for retaliatory investigations and tricked into switching to Brookhaven Police Department for setup firing. That's what happened with him. Chris Valente was a lot smarter. I don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anybody else is stupid here. But I'll say it. He doesn't need to say it. I'll say it for him. Chris Valente saw how corrupt these people were at the top. So he strategically maneuvered around them so they can't sabotage him. I'm going to say that. Officer Valente signed agreement to not sue Dunwoody, did not make any claims thereafter in having been targeted for retaliatory investigations. Isn't that funny that out of the 5 people here, the only one that was not worried about retaliation to his career was the one that signed a paper that said he won't sue? What about Brian Bolden? Brian Bolden was falsely accused of stealing an energy bar from a patrol car after he whistleblew Lieutenant Espinoza. This is something I didn't put in the other slides. This is something you can see for yourself. These were like the small revenge investigations that couldn't have led anywhere before Brian Bolden outed that other sergeant for the second DUI. So before Brian Bolden even outed the second DUI of that one sergeant, the information officer, there was still attempts to retaliation investigate Brian Bolden before even that. Falsely accused of stealing an energy bar from a patrol car to launch a revenge investigation, later fired for informing the public of the second DUI arrest of a higher-ranking officer than him. Think about how this affects the trajectory of these people's lives and their careers and their image in the public. You know, it's one thing to say, like, oh, the person was fired. Like, no, these people, once they're fired and once these things get labeled and smeared on their foreheads, they have to constantly, for a great portion of their professional life, even personal life, they have to constantly defend themselves. Takes one to know one, guys. I'm saying this to these officers. I know, not only do I know where you guys have been, but when you find out what they did to me, you're going to be like, wow, we thought we had it rough. But I can empathize with these people because the seniors at this police department not only try to get away with what they do wrong, but they punish the people who speak about it to the point that the people who speak about it have to constantly defend their own integrity and their own ethics and their own truthfulness and character. Any single person that's ever been right in the eyes of a senior Dunwoody police officer has to constantly defend their own validity, as these senior people don't have to do the same. What about Brian Castellanos? Sued Dunwoody in 2022. Unknown if any retaliatory investigations took place before or after he left Dunwoody PD and filed his lawsuit. This is the guy who even had his wife be spoken to improperly. This is the guy, Brian Castellanos, this is the guy who Senior Lieutenant Fidel Espinoza took a picture of in the bathroom while he was going to the bathroom. This is the guy that Espinoza committed a felony offense against and got away with it. Officer Handel, number 5, sued Dunwoody, claims to have been targeted for retaliatory investigations and having his peace officer credentials targeted for speaking out. Officer Handel, out of the 5, when it comes to the sexual harassment stuff, was one of the 5 that I don't believe received any nudes or asked for any nudes or anything like that. But because he simply was around this climate and around the activity, and he basically motivated for this to become known, now his peace officer credentials being targeted because lights and sirens. Lights and sirens. Lights, running late to work, lights and sirens. The man needs to forever have his career, mess with that. And don't get me wrong, he got his peace officer credentials back, I believe. But I'm trying to have people look at this and then zoom out and ask yourself, why do so many people who did the right thing have to pay? I'll tell you why. Because of the person who dictates what takes place. Let's continue. This next slide is very important. Most professional law enforcement agencies around the country, whether it be at the county level, county sheriff's departments, or city police departments, have a separate division called Internal Affairs. We all know what it is. Most of us know what it is. Some departments call it Office of Ethics and Standards, something like that. It's basically the office comprised of people that keeps everyone in check, removes the ability for corruption to take place within the department, the law enforcement department. Even at times, if, let's say, the Internal Affairs Department finds corruption on the part of the sheriff, even if they may report to the sheriff or they may report to the chief of police, they can still actually go elsewhere to the municipal leadership of that county or city and expose even corruption of the leader of the law enforcement department that they may even report to. Okay, so an internal affairs department is extremely, extremely important because it's the one trusted department of a law enforcement agency that is not able to be shaken. That's their whole role. They cannot be shaken. They cannot be corrupted. They cannot be manipulated. And they make sure that everything else will be found if it is. From the beginning of the creation of the Dunwoody Police Department in 2009, there has been no internal affairs department. Why? Why? They have, the Dunwoody Police has the money for SWAT gear, for this program, for that program. They have Stingrays. They have all this stuff, but they don't have the budget for an internal affairs department, or maybe something else is driving that decision. I think people are smart enough to figure out what's going on here. Number one, I'm going to read it. Billy Grogan assumes total power and control over any major internal investigation of any officer misconduct or alleged crimes, obscuring any guaranteed impartiality or removal of his own personal bias. We'll get to in a second of one, maybe possibly a few times when, in order to give the illusion of impartiality, he contacted his buddies at the next door town, the town next over, and said, hey, I need you to investigate something for me, as if that's somehow impartial in of itself. The good old boy network, alive and well here. Number two, this includes the reliance on friendships and alliances with senior police officers in neighboring police departments to conduct investigations on Chief Billy Grogan's behalf, giving the illusion of impartiality. I'm sorry for repeating myself. I literally just said that because as I was explaining what I was explaining after the first paragraph, I was not even paying attention to the second paragraph of what I was about to say. I may sound like I'm kind of like drilling this, hard, but because it needs to be. This slide right here shows the reason why so many bad people I don't want to say so many bad people, why so much bad stuff has been allowed, and when it's been called out, the bad stuff doesn't really get dealt with because it was never really bad to begin with, was it now? Wink, wink. It says a lot about a chief of police that doesn't want an independent internal affairs department. It says a lot about that person in terms of power and control that person wants for themselves. Let's continue. Next slide. Reliance on the 3 suburban town trilogy. The city of Dunwoody, city of Sandy Springs, and the city of Brookhaven. This may not be understood initially by anyone who doesn't live in the metro Atlanta area. For anyone who might be watching this from outside of even Georgia or even other parts of Georgia far away from here, this is a little bit of like a tri-city area. All 3 of these cities are absolutely beautiful. In the suburbs, very rich, lots of money between the 3 of these towns. The picture right here on the left-hand side is an older one, because you can tell that Chief Billy Grogan on the far left is younger in this photo. This was at least I want to say maybe 5, maybe 6. I don't know, something like that. I don't remember snagging the date. But as you can see in that photo, that is on the far left, Chief Billy Grogan. That is the chief of police for Sandy Springs in the middle, and the chief of police for Brookhaven on the far right. There's a significant reason for this slide, but I also need to emphasize, for formalities and for legal purposes, what I wrote next to Chief Billy Grogan's photo right there in the black background is not fact. It's my opinion. I am legally allowed to criticize a public official. I'm allowed to. This is not against the law. So in my opinion of this public official, from what I have experienced because of this public official being Chief Billy Grogan, when I went back and looked at the track record of the things that happened with the other police officers that were blackballed, that were retaliated against, I came up with an understanding of a trait, especially with what happened at that one time with Officer Brian Bolden, who, remember, Brian Bolden was the one that exposed the second DUI of the other sergeant. So what did Chief of Police Billy Grogan do? Well, he realized that by that time there were a lot of instances where he controlled the investigations as the internal affairs. So what did he do? He said he has an idea. He'll just ring up his buddy at the Sandy Springs Police Department, and he'll just ask his buddy at the Sandy Springs Police Department right next door in the town next over to run the investigation on behalf of Billy Grogan, to give, I don't want to say again the illusion, but you go to saying, was it impartial? If all these guys are friends, is it going to be impartial? Is it even the role of a next door neighboring town's police chief to conduct an investigation because there's no internal affairs? Why not hire an independent agency to conduct the investigation? Why not that? Why call the buddy who runs the police department of the town next over? And obviously this is where we're getting to the answer of my question here in the black background here. My opinion is Chief Billy Grogan conceals from other neighboring police chiefs the myriad of scandals and deep-rooted corruption taking place at the Dunwoody Police Department, as he relies on other top cops' own cleaner track records to make his own efforts appear artificially ethical and not retaliatory. Meaning he's leading on the better track records and cleaner track records of his peers so that his own agenda to retaliate on who he wants to retaliate on, in that particular case in the past being Brian Bolden. How dare Brian Bolden expose the second DUI? That's a violation of the contradictory to the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech policy the Dunwoody police have of not criticizing publicly your own police department. So in order to conceal the vengeance, maybe contact the next door neighbor's town's police chief and have them do my dirty work for me. Let's continue. Now we come to the slide where we recognize all of the remarkable and respectable and honorable affiliations, accreditations, status symbols of Mr. Billy Grogan. Top of the title, Billy Grogan's extensive pursuits to fortify his image and influence via affiliations. And I'm going to skip all the insignias and just go down to the black background at the bottom. And yet again, I say my opinion. To criticize a public official legally is, from my assessment of not only people who've come before me who've been victimized, but myself having been terrorized, is, it's my opinion, the Chief Billy Grogan proactively pursued as many possible law enforcement continued education programs, affiliations, networks, task force memberships, you name it, he's done it, he pursues it. I'm guessing that a lot of it was paid for by taxpayer money, these continued education programs and whatever else. I think that maybe, I might be wrong, City of Dunwoody fits the bill to a lot of these things where he can shroud himself with these status symbols to insulate his public image. So in the event he's ever accused of any federal level corruption, he can leverage these established ties to discredit and gaslight anyone's accusations that might lead to him being investigated himself. And do I have any personal experience of my own when it comes to having formed this opinion? Absolutely. You see, when I realized how dangerous and lethal what they're targeting me for, a massive frame job operation to put me in prison for the rest of my life falsely, and I'll go on polygraph about the allegations. When I was being terrorized by the senior officers directing this frame job at me while I was trapped living in my mother's house in Dunwoody, as I struggled to fend off the frame job logistics on a daily basis, this shadow secret war that these corrupt police officers were waging on me, when I finally, without even being able to finish my email, and without being able to even finish the organization of the evidence that I've collected on them to prove what they were doing to me, to prove that it's a frame job. By the time I reached out to the FBI, they already knew I was going to reach to the FBI. And this is the reason why the FBI won't talk to me. You see, I want to slow down here for a second on this particular slide. Do you remember when I mentioned in the beginning of this video the whole thing with Detective Robert Bentivegna? Just 2 years after the inception of Dunwoody Police in 2009, Robert Bentivegna, already 2011, was already giving away data to known criminals, people with known criminal ties, I should say, is the exact way how the Department of Justice said it. That was already taking place in 2011. So already 2011, 2 years into the inception of Dunwoody Police, there's someone already committing federal crimes. So for the listeners, what do you think at that point this chief of police did? You think he doesn't know that the feds raised their eyebrows at him so early on in the inception of his police department? One of his detectives already breaking federal laws? If you were a chief of police, I'm just saying hypothetical. I'm not saying that he enabled Detective Robert Bentivegna to do these federal crimes. I'm not saying that he Billy Grogan willfully enabled Robert Bentivegna to do these federal crimes. I'm not saying that because it can't be proven, because neither one of them would ever admit to such a thing, right? Neither one of them would say something like that. But it does beg the question of whether Chief Billy Grogan was highly proactive at seeking FBI certifications, accreditations, as you can see there, even on the left-hand side of the screen. FBI Law Enforcement Executive Seminar, FBI National Academy, FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. It seems to me like after what took place with Detective Bentivegna and the feds watching Dunwoody Police, wondering if there's anything else that they need to be knowing about, the best way to get the feds off your back is to seek accreditations associated with them, where the feds would foolishly sit back and be like, oh, that was a lone wolf with that Robert Bentivegna guy who was working for Dunwoody Police. The chief of police didn't condone that. Look, he's sending us an olive branch constantly by embracing us with all of his pursuits to get additional certifications that are FBI type certifications and whatnot. I think that's a pretty slick maneuver right there to keep them off your back. If I were him, I'm just saying, I'm not speaking directly to him. I'm saying if I were a corrupt police chief and I were allowing my senior officers to commit federal crimes and the FBI were raising their eyebrows, I would do the same thing. I would start getting some accreditations with the FBI to kind of like smooth things over and butter them up again, to keep them off my back so that I can continue to potentially do things that I might have never stopped or was always condoning in the first place. That's just my opinion. Can't prove it. Next slide. And now we come to the slide of the stats. The information that you're seeing has already been presented. It's just being presented in a different way to really let it sink in, because it's important for what they did to me. Stats of verifiable officer misconduct only publicly known thus far. Starting with what happened with Robert Bentivegna. What happened there? Abusing sensitive law enforcement databases and intel information for personal gain. That's an instance that Dunwoody Police, there was at least one provable instance where information only meant to use for the benefit of law enforcement legitimate investigations was abused for personal gain of an officer. Second verifiable officer misconduct has to do with violating constitutional Fourth Amendment rights via the invasion of private property. In the case of Dale Laskowski, who was sued 4 times for various instances of unlawful search, unlawful detention. It happened with his car. And again, there was no condemnation. So because it happened 4 times, it's one thing if it happened just once, right? But it happened 4 times. So now we see a track record where an officer believed that they were okay, that nothing may never not even happen to them. They won't get reprimanded in any sort of way by their sergeant if they intrusively violate the privacy, the private property, I should say, of someone. And here we come to the most awful one, the most dangerous one. Unlawful voyeurism and acquisition of sex-based photos and videos of other people. Multiple officers is, well, the first time it happened was with Detective Caleb Gilbert on the 2016 trial, when we found out that Judge Gail Flake threw out his evidence. And I continue to question, because we'll never be able to know, but I'm going to continue to pose that question. aside from the evidence having been thrown out, it already existed. People having sex were already filmed. The videos were already available. If I were one of those people, I'd be pretty creeped out that someone was filming me and completely got away with it. And I would be wondering if the inner circle of that police department that was able to do this and get away with it, if they got away with it to the point that they were even able to enjoy what they were recording, and no one would ever know who ended up watching those videos. No one would know. No one would know if other lieutenants watched those videos, captains, or the chief of police. No one would know. How could you prove that? How could you prove even if there were copies made in secret to pass around as giggle, giggle, funny, funny? You wouldn't know. The only reason I'm saying that is because if someone was willing to do this, willing to place cameras in an apartment to watch people have sex and film it, considering this entire track record, one would be not that far off to be concerned if there was a secondary benefit to having illegally filmed people having sex. And in addition to that instance, one also can't help but to also re-invoke what Senior Lieutenant Fidel Espinosa did by not only obsessively asking his junior officers for nude pictures, sending his own nude pictures to them, and even to the point of entering the men's bathroom, pulling out his camera, and taking a photo of one of his junior officers using the restroom. And there was no problem seen there with that. According to the reports of Billy Grogan, I don't even know if Billy Grogan even acknowledged this one particular thing that I read in the lawsuit of that one Dunwoody police ex-Dunwoody police officer that said this in his own court paperwork, that when he went to use the bathroom, Lieutenant Fidel Espinosa took a photo of him. So this last one is the most dangerous one that has been condoned, is what I'm trying to say. It's the most dangerous to be condoned. It's one thing to condone the unlawful abuse of law enforcement data to give to people with connections to criminals. That's horrible. Violating someone's Fourth Amendment rights by intrusively searching their property, falsely, detaining them, all that stuff. That's horrible. But that last one is dangerous. Being condoned by senior officers. Because what it also would mean is that, and this is where I'm going with this, and I'm going there. What it means is that it's one thing for the Dunwoody Police Department and Chief Billy Grogan to lose a lawsuit for $500,000 like Officer Roger Halstead sued them for. It's one thing for $500,000, okay? $500,000. It's another thing for a $400,000 lawsuit, maybe even $1 million. $1 million sucks for them to have to pay for someone that they've wronged if it was proven that they indeed wronged the other officer who was suing them for $1 million. But we've seen thus far what they're willing to do to retaliate on their own junior officers simply for having whistleblown misconduct and at the endangerment of having to pay the whistleblower money in a lawsuit for sexual harassment, being somewhere in the neighborhood of several $100,000 to right at the entry point of a 7-figure lawsuit. But what sort of retaliation would they be inspired to engineer if someone who wasn't even a police officer was going to sue them for 10 times more? How far would they go? Would they go 10 times further to retaliatory revenge, fake investigate a civilian who's not even an officer, who is able to sue them for, at minimum, 10 times more money? And even have it lead to a guaranteed investigation against at least one of their senior detectives who may have broken the law and this time can't just easily get away from the state like all of the other senior officers were able to get away from the state? How far would they then go above and beyond all the retaliatory measures that have already been demonstrated thus far to get the person who's able to sue them for at least $10 million and have officers lose their jobs and possibly officers go to prison? How far would they go? And the answer to that is that they would most certainly go 10 times harder on that person. What's coming in this expose on YouTube? I have to very methodically govern what data can even be released in the hopes that the worst part of the data, evidence I should say, that I've collected on Dunwoody Police would finally be acknowledged, looked at by the FBI. I shouldn't have had to make this YouTube channel. For the people who think I'm looking for like my 15 minutes or seeking clout, I'm saving my life on YouTube. 99% of the people that are vesting their interest in this situation, I'm telling you right now, to the 99%, I don't think many of you can handle knowing what these people did. You won't even believe it, because you wouldn't even believe people who took an oath and are wearing badges would even do this. You wouldn't even believe it. In fact, what they're looking for as they're eventually going to see these videos, these corrupt police officers, they're going to try to find an in on what I'm saying to twist it as they've usually done. They're looking for something in my words to say, we can go back to a DeKalb County Superior Court judge and deceive the DeKalb County Superior Court judges more than we already have. Because look, he just admitted he knew something. He just knew something that we did to frame him, so then we can flip it around and say, well, surely it was him that did it, because now look, he said that he knows what we did, or he says that he knows what happened, so we can continue to conceal that we're the ones who planted things around him. Because if he knows what we planted around him and he speaks about what we planted around him, then we can continue to lie to judges and say, well, surely, see, he must have been the one who was implicated because, look, he knows the case. I only know the case because I counter-surveilled them. I only know the case because they don't understand people who have telepathy. Telepathy is higher than intuition. And for the people who don't believe in clairvoyance and telepathy, sorry, because this particular situation is one where a group of incredibly evil and corrupt police officers were trying to frame someone who has telepathic and clairvoyant abilities. So it wasn't just that I was counter-surveilling them. When I finally realized what they were doing, I already knew what they were planning to do next. This is why this entire frame job hasn't been able to work. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been wasted in secret on this. This has traveled from one town to the next. They're still stalking me. There's still indication that someone at the Dunwoody city level, a judge, a city judge, a city attorney, someone is continuously signing off on bogus subpoenas using falsified probable cause to continue to send these subpoenas potentially to my banking institutions to see what my cell phone bill might be paid to continuously try to stalk me anywhere in Georgia just to get that one last chance to try to plant something on me and file false crime tips after they plant something on me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's continue to the next slide. These are not all of the Dunwoody police officers that I've interacted with throughout the years. I've interacted with many, many more than this. These are just the more senior ones. The other uniformed officers that I've interacted with, even as recent as probably in the last 6 months, have been great. There's 2 female Dunwoody police officers that are absolutely phenomenal. There is, I don't want to go down the whole list, but I would actually like to take an opportunity right now in this video to actually say this to the other uniformed officers that are not at the sergeant or above. A lot of this for you guys is something where you had no idea that there was an inner circle in your police department. Whatever you even think you know about the people that you would recognize on this slide here, for the current uniformed Dunwoody police officers, you most likely don't even barely know anything about Robert Bentivegna unless you were there for that long. You definitely know Anthony Stallings. He's moved over to another agency. The last 4, actually Caleb Gilbert's obviously not there. You may know him, not know him. But the last 3, Tim Fecht, Andrew Faunas, Tim Waldron, they're still there. So the first 3 are no longer there for different reasons. The last 3 are there. Whatever you think you know about these people is only what you're supposed to know. Whatever you think you see about their characters or anything about their conduct, whatever, this is only what you're supposed to see, and this is only what you're supposed to know. So, by any means, I'm not trying to put a total umbrella over every single Dunwoody cop. That's not fair and that's not true. There's some of them that are there that are absolutely ethical to the bone. They are in integrity to the bone. They just don't know their leaders as well as they think they do. So let's continue. First column, Robert Bentivegna. Ironically enough, the guy who is giving data from law enforcement databases to known people who have known connections with criminals, sat down in his office, met the guy, talked to the guy briefly. Let me read it instead of giving commentary. Read it. Ronen invited into Dunwoody Police Office by Detective Robert Bentivegna at that time to discuss ways in how to catch the recent perpetrators breaking into the clubhouse at Ronen's luxury apartment building. In the beginning of their inception, they were in a different office than they are right now, Dunwoody Police, right nearby my apartment complex. At that time, I was living in Access at Perimeter, and there were some break-ins at our community clubhouse, whatever you want to call it, pool table, whatever. Even then, I was the type of person that is involved with stopping crime. I got annoyed when people were breaking into our community clubhouse at my apartment complex. So, I gave a call to this guy and I said, hey, I think I know how they're doing it. Let me give you some ins on how to catch them. I think at that time it was something like, have you checked Craigslist, because whatever they're stealing from our clubhouse, I think they're trying to flip it on Craigslist. So keep an eye on that. I think I might have even found some links. So I was invited to the office, sat down with Bentivegna at that time. And even then, that early on, it was the good old boy network, obviously. Like people walking by the office, it was, I don't want to get into it. It's not even that relevant, but it was relevant to just kind of point out that that's as far back as I had interaction with these officers. So it's not like they don't know me. At the irony there is that even Billy Grogan passed by Robert Bentivegna's office while I was in there. He would have never recognized me. I recognized him though. So let's continue to the next one. Being Detective Anthony Stallings. He wasn't a detective for the whole time. He switched, I think, from detective back to sergeant. I don't know. I think now, when I looked him up, I think he's now a captain somewhere. I think possibly Powder Springs, Georgia Police Department. Good for him. Have nothing bad to say about him. Nothing. Even the notes that he took at the time of the original investigation. The original investigation, let me, remind people back again his relevance, just to get his interactions. He was the first detective that was assigned to my mother when my mother was first getting harassed and cyberstalked by Zello Gang Cyberstalkers, who were mad that I was more popular than them, and were mad that me and the woman that I was living with from Zello, that we were in a live-in relationship. We kind of became the power couple, but people hated us for it and got jealous and only knew my name, so attacked me, not her. So then it spilt over to my mother's Dunwoody house, even though we weren't living in Dunwoody, and Anthony Stallings was the one who was first assigned to the original case that went nowhere because of my own apprehension. I'll admit it, that was my fault at that time. It doesn't excuse the fact that there were other people later on in the Dunwoody police that completely just flipped it around because of arrogance and their own pre-existing corruption that I had no clue about. But Anthony Stallings was decent. I have nothing bad to say about the guy. Ronen, no longer living in Dunwoody, is cyberstalked by unstable users from a live chat app called Zello. Assailants make bizarre efforts to attack Ronen. Definitely bizarre. By attacking his mother's house in Dunwoody. So the notes he wrote on the case were excellent. Then we get over to Detective Caleb Gilbert. Like I put over there, 2016, 2017. I don't remember the exact time of when the re-escalations took place with more attacks targeting my mother's Dunwoody home. And this is where things went bad. Because Detective Caleb Gilbert's demeanor was entirely different than Detective Anthony Stallings' demeanor. Now, mind you, this Detective Caleb Gilbert that I have here, that I did also sit down with, is the same guy that put the cameras in the apartment to film people having sex. And was able to leave before anything was able to be investigated on him, having done so unlawfully. So I wrote here in this particular section for him, continued harassment campaigns led by even more unstable Zello cyberstalkers forming a gang, which we'll cover in future videos. They did on Zello. They formed an online RICO-style cyber-stalking gang. Leads to more threats and targeting of Ronen's mother's house in Dunwoody. So this is when I finally said, I should have came down and met with Anthony Stallings. I didn't realize it was going to continue. I'm definitely going to Dunwoody Police now with my mother, sitting down in a room, explaining everything, showing more evidence, And Detective Gilbert at that time was like, with all due respect, you're not a resident of Dunwoody, so I'm going to defer back to your mom. And I'm like, what do you mean you're going to defer back to my mother? The only reason that she's getting attacked is because she's having her Dunwoody house in your jurisdiction taken hostage and hijacked by these psychos who only just are doing it to get clout on the app, on Zello, because she happens to be related to me. They hate me, so they're attacking her. So this all entirely has to do with me. What are you talking about? I'm the one with all the evidence. I'm the one on Zello recording conversations of these people making threats to harm and attack my mother's Dunwoody home. So how do you figure that I'm not involved in this? Like, what are you talking about? Didn't want to hear it. The reason that this is important to mention Caleb Gilbert at that time is because of whatever bullshit twisting of narrative, backdoor criticisms were written in the case notes that only Dunwoody Police would be able to see. Watch them now that, as I say this, potentially try to go and delete stuff. I already know they've already gone to delete tons and tons of evidence where they talked mad trash about me to multiple places and multiple entities. They've probably gone and deleted a lot of it to conceal that they were acting under the color of law thereafter, under a complete bias and with no impartiality, personal vendetta based. So I'm sure they deleted a lot of stuff. But going back to what I was saying, without going off too much on a tangent, whatever he wrote in the case notes, Caleb Gilbert, about somehow twisting it and flipping it around, doing the Uno reverse card on me and making it look like it's my fault for my mother getting targeted, for my mother's house getting cyberstalked and harassed. It's my fault because I won't leave Zello. It goes back again to the original analogy that I said. What if this was a bar? And this kind of does go off on a tangent because this shows how incompetent and arrogant some local law enforcement is to dismiss criminal harassment and stalking happening online versus happening at a bar or in physical reality within their jurisdiction. Okay, the point that I'm making here is, with that bar analogy, is if I were going to a bar where everyone hung out and there's a group that doesn't like me, and they then go to my mother's house and stalk her physically because we all live in the same town, you don't tell me to not go to the bar anymore. Don't tell me not to show up at the bar where I'm more popular than these creeps at the corner who decide that the best mode of revenge of me rejecting them, not wanting to be their friend, winning arguments with them in front of a wider audience. Don't tell me that I shouldn't go to the bar anymore so that my mother's house will stop getting harassed. Go after the assailants and do your job. No, they know better. They know better. Their common sense is far more superior than my common sense, apparently. So whatever he wrote there set the stage for their brewing dislike for me that would have just continued to grow into an uncontrollable avalanche that led into the existing frame job operation. Then we get into good old Sergeant Tim Fecht. Good old Sergeant Fecht, Tim Fecht. Captain America Tim Fecht, who acts like he can do absolutely no wrong. Always well-intended. Allegedly. 2019, when a serious issue that took place, leading me back to Dunwoody, not by my choice, but because of the unstable situation that took place with my ex-partner at that time from Zello, leading to a restraining order. I continued to get, isn't that ironic? I was the one being given a restraining order and for a reason that I'm going to explain in future videos, but I don't want to overwhelm people with too much data right now. But yeah, the entire live-in relationship was completely a nightmare decision of mine for the trajectory of my life, because I'm not going to get into in this video. I'm going to just read the section that I set for Tim Fecht. Is Ronen is forced to temporarily relocate to his estranged mother's home in Dunwoody, the same house that's been getting gang harassed and gang stalked, after being served with an ill-conceived restraining order by the deceptive live-in girlfriend that I met from Zello. Deceptive how? We'll get to that later, because this is much bigger than this person's deception that I was in a live-in relationship with. It got way worse and more dangerous than just who she is to the story. But what did Tim Fecht do at that time? How did Tim Fecht even get involved? Well, after I was given this ill-conceived restraining order and had to basically be forced out of my house. At that time, it was Roswell, Georgia. It was not Alpharetta anymore. We moved from Alpharetta to Roswell. And based on certain things that took place that I discovered about my then ex-partner, she felt that the best way to silence me is to call me, a woman abuser and all this other stuff, only when I found out what she did. Before I found out what she did, she never went to the police. She was making more money than me. She could have kicked me out any time. She could have called the police anytime. Conveniently, only when I found something out that she was doing to have me harmed, that's when she suddenly became an abuse victim. How convenient. But it completely shattered the stability of my life at that point, where because I was still sustaining more attacks to my finances by Zello Gang Cyberstalkers trying to get me fired from anything that they literally wanted me to make they wanted me to make no money. They wanted me to be completely fired so that then they can be on Zello saying, "Ha, Ronen, look, you don't make any money. You don't make any money, loser. Well, you guys keep attacking my ability to make money, so whose fault is that?" But anyway, again, I don't want to completely digress. The reason Tim Fecht got involved at that time is because immediately when I moved back to my mother's house, and when I say moving back, it's not like I really grew up there to begin with. I left the house at age 17. The family life was very, very dysfunctional. I started my adult life at 17 years old, so it's not like I was living at mommy's house for, extended periods of time. 17 years old, I was already fending for myself. So to come back to a parent's house after already having been out, independent, 17 years old, coming back at that time I was 41. From 17 years old to 41. At 41 years old, and you have to come back to your estranged mother's house, it's already weird and extremely uncomfortable given the circumstances that led to it. But it was also even weirder because I was moving to the very house that was continuously getting gang stalked and harassed by the people on Zello. So now that they found out through this ill-conceived restraining order that was given to me by the ex-partner, they found out that basically I moved back to Dunwoody. They're like, wait a second, this whole time that he wasn't living in Dunwoody, we were cyber-stalking and harassing his mother's house in Dunwoody to basically take her address hostage. But now you're telling us that Ronen moved to the address himself. Now he's there alongside with his mother. Like, they had a field day. There were additional threats made to me by my ex-partner's own friends on Zello, brandishing Glock pistols, money, saying that they'll pay anyone to come to Dunwoody to harm me, all sorts of stuff. You name it, I recorded it. They constantly did Freedom of Information Act requests from Fulton County, as well as DeKalb County, whatever, to constantly pry into my life. They literally made me this like celebrity, but in a weird way where like they wanted to know everything about my life to attack. But if I were to go to the police, guess what they would do thereafter? They would then bum rush the police, Dunwoody Police. They would contact through phone calls and emails and say, no, Ronen's the villain here. Ronen's the boogeyman in the situation. As if I have the resources and time to go against like 10, 12, 15, 20 people. So good old Tim Fecht at that time was in a position to be the one who assigns caseloads to detectives. Well, Tim Fecht read whatever was written by Caleb Gilbert. I'm getting ahead of myself right now. That's going to be in the next slide. But you're kind of able to tell now where this is going. Essentially, Tim Fecht read whatever he read and appointed himself as the decision maker of whether anything should be investigated at all. And in 2019, the evidence was much harsher. It was terroristic threats. It was one of my ex-partner's friends in New York conveying terroristic threats, communicating terroristic threats over interstate communications. That was a felony. And the guy's wife is an attorney. That's one case. I also filed a second case in 2019 where another person was habitually abusing access to Fulton County court records to harvest my phone number and email addresses and whatever they need to bring it back onto the Zello app, to propagate it over every single Zello chat room, to ask other gang cyberstalkers to make use of the information to further harass me. I was actually getting phone calls. I had to change the phone number because the phone number was on the court documents, and that made its way to Zello. It's just a big old mess. And Tim Fecht was basically like, we really don't like this guy at this point. Why not just pretend to investigate his cases and not let it be brought to any detective, and eventually he'll give up because we won't really do anything with his cases. We just won't tell him that we're not doing anything with his cases. And I dare ask at that point if a sergeant that's responsible for sending cases to detectives is making the decision of whether something should be investigated or not before even a detective can even evaluate the evidence. Is that obstruction of justice? If a sergeant, in this case Tim Fecht, is blocking my cases from being evaluated by detectives and even sitting down with me and seeing the new evidence that I wasn't even able to get a chance to get them when I first went and filed the incident reports in 2019. If a sergeant is blocking my ability to meet with a detective so that I can pursue charges on these additional assailants, he's blocking my ability to seek justice. Is that obstruction? Sounds to me and looks to me like it would be obstruction, which is also in of itself illegal. Usually you hear of suspects who aren't police officers engaging in obstruction. But like we've learned thus far in this video, when police officers are putting cameras in people's apartments and filming them having sex and going into bathrooms and taking pictures of another officer going to the bathroom. In this case, if a sergeant wants to block your ability to have your cases investigated properly and block your ability to have your evidence be looked at, that's also a crime, in my opinion. So that's what Tim Fecht did. Lieutenant Andrew Faunus, 2019 to 2021, when I realized Tim Fecht was doing nothing and won't do anything and just pretending to, I went above Tim Fecht's head and I complained to a higher level person above him, Lieutenant Andrew Faunus. I believed that Lieutenant Andrew Faunus would be able to kind of be like the interferer of this fake impression of mine that other officers on Dunwoody Police had, where he would be like, listen guys, like there's a lot of indication that this guy's getting attacked, especially since he's moved back to his mother's house. Why don't we look at his evidence? You think that happened? That didn't happen. No, Ronen's manipulating you, Faunus, said probably most likely Fecht. My opinion, can't prove it. It's just my opinion. I'm not saying it factually happened, but essentially Andrew Faunus became the good cop. Not any advocate for me whatsoever, because it was told to him, most likely in my opinion, that I was trying to manipulate him. It's not that Tim Fecht was trying to manipulate Andrew Faunus. No, that's not what was going on. It's not that Sergeant Tim Fecht was trying to manipulate other officers within the department to see me as a whack job. That wasn't what's going on. That wasn't manipulation. No, it was me attempting to manipulate Andrew Fondis, and I'm the troublemaker. Sure. So I'm going to read the section there. Ronen suffers increased attacks by Zello Gang Stalkers and realizes that Sergeant Tim Fecht is deliberately blocking cases from going to detectives. Ronen then complains about Sergeant Tim Fecht to Lieutenant Fondis. How do you think that worked out for me? Didn't work out well. Good old boy network, right? The additional person that's lastly mentioned here is Detective Tim Waldron. 2020. Why is he relevant in 2020? Because he arrested me. We're going to continue to unravel this in future videos. This is just an overview right now that led to the frame job. This isn't even part of the main frame job. Frame job did not start getting planned until 2021, even though they falsely arrested me in 2020. Emphasis on falsely. Let me read the slide real quick, or that part. Mutual hatred for Ronen by Ronen's ex-partner, whom I met from Zello, plus Zello stalkers who were lying to Dunwoody cops about my conduct, and Sergeant Fecht's own hatred for me, having already complained about him to his senior, being Lieutenant Fondis, developed this whole mishmash collusion where multiple people now, in fact, let me read the rest of it, leads to botched revenge investigation. Now, I'm not calling what happened in 2020 a frame job. It was a revenge investigation. There's a difference here. The frame job in 2021 that's still going on right now in 2023, the frame job attempt was spawned from my finding out that what was used to arrest me in 2020 was forged evidence. And when I found out, after being bonded out of jail and looking the arrest warrant affidavit, when I found out that forged email evidence was used, only later on, when they found out, which I'm not going to cover just yet, because again, I'm not trying to overwhelm people with too much information. When they found out that I found out how to prove it in court, is when they said, okay, we got to do something far worse. And when I'm saying they, I'm not necessarily saying Tim Fecht. Tim Fecht didn't orchestrate a frame job on me. Neither did Andrew Fondis. While I know Tim Fecht was obstructing my cases, and Andrew Fondis was assisting in that obstruction by playing fake good cop to me, and also agreeing that none of my things should be fairly completely pursued after about 2020. Other people decided to design a frame job. Other senior officers let's continue. I was about to say something, but it's just like not the right time yet in this video, or in this portion of the information reveal. This is overwhelming, by the way, folks. This is overwhelming for one man to try to keep in one mind, in one brain. But, in fact, you know what? I will say this. I will say this right now without caring, because I'm no longer going to have my voice silenced while people are trying to frame me so that the truth never comes out. If anyone would like to know how easy it is to prove that my arrest in 2020, when I was accused of violating a restraining order that was ill-conceived in the first place, the restraining order intention itself had nothing to do with safety, is all a big mirage. It had to do with blackmail. I was blackmailed, basically, essentially communicated that if I were to speak out in public about my ex-partner's own issues and own practices, if I spoke out in public, then the frame job would be coming from my ex-partner, because then she had power over me through the ill-conceived restraining order. Once the restraining order was over my head, if she wanted to frame me, if she wanted to join along in something like that to punish me, if she wanted to do anything to me, people in America have no idea how easy it is to get somebody arrested once you have a restraining order on them. This is kind of a sickening thing about our country, but I'm going to defer that to a much future video because I don't want to fall into too much commentary. Okay? It's very easy to prove that the evidence that was submitted to DeKalb County to get my arrest warrant in 2020 was forged. How do I know? It's in the arrest warrant affidavit. All a person needs to do is go read the multi-page arrest warrant affidavit, where Detective Tim Waldron basically explains the nature of the perceived violation. The nature of the perceived violation is my ex-partner called from New York. She wasn't even living in Georgia. The moment she got her restraining order, she dipped out of the whole state. She didn't want to tell that to the judge in the beginning. You know, people get restraining orders because they're legitimately worried for their safety. My ex-partner was not legitimately worried about her safety. She was already planning to leave the state. What did she think? That, like, I was going to, go 5 states to find... give me a break. She knew what she was doing. She strategized it. The motive was ulterior until it led to other things that, again, not appropriate for this video to explain it, but it will be explained, that essentially, almost at the conclusion of the 1-year restraining order, she calls in what I like to joke now in hindsight as a mail order arrest. You know the term, a mail order bride? She called up from New York and tried to request, almost like a McDonald's order, a mail order arrest of me, 5 states away, citing the restraining order. Well, when she contacted the Dunwoody police, after all the times that they've ignored all of my cases, they welcomed her request with open arms, ready to do whatever it takes to collude with my ex to run a botched investigation, to teach me a lesson. After all the years that they haven't investigated squat, they haven't gone after any of the Zello cyberstalker assailants, I was supposed to become everybody's convenient scapegoat. The Dunwoody police, the Zello Gang Stalkers, and my ex-partner. All creating a trilogy, a triangulation of their own around me. I'm supposed to play the role of the common denominator of everybody's problems involved in this. So it's great to scapegoat me because Dunwoody Police's pre-existing corruption led them to not being able to properly investigate anytime that I went after them with cases. Hey, here's my cases. Investigate my evidence. No, screw you. I'm going off on a tangent. It's very easy. All one needs to go do is go read the arrest warrant affidavit, where Detective Tim Waldron thought he would be smart by telling my ex-partner, listen, so you're saying that you're getting anonymous emails from Ronen, and the anonymous emails are coming from this service called Proton Mail, Swiss-based company that has private email, private this, private that, VPN, cloud service, you name it, they got it. They're a great company. Multiple people on Zello know about Proton Mail, by the way. But because of the nature of Proton Mail being an anonymous email service that doesn't leave any IP address traces in the email for anyone to even be able to know where the email was originating from, Tim Waldron, who was in receipt of these Proton Mail emails from my ex-partner saying that all all of them are me and all of them are this or all that, and I'm violating, and she's afraid for her life 5 states away from some emails. Right. Because they were untraceable, Tim Waldron said to my ex-partner, he said, listen, I have an idea. Go back to your old emails that you had, that you were good with Ronen when you guys were in good standings. You know, like a Gmail email, like an old Gmail, and send me an old email of his that can be proven came from him. And if the words of that old email match with the verbiage and words of any of these Proton Mail emails, well then Tim Waldron then can take the, what we would call, you know, like in a clinical study, we have something called the control. He was asking for a control email. He was asking for something that is proven to have come from me. And if the words from a legitimately verifiable email that comes from me has words that match with the wordings of the Proton Mail emails, then he can go to a judge and he can say, look, we're playing word match games from a legitimate email that did come at some point a very long time ago from Ronen to my ex-partner. And look at these other emails that she's saying she's getting in the middle of the restraining order period. Clearly, the words match from Ronen's old email to these Proton Mail things. And it worked. It worked. The judge bought it. The judge bought that pitch and signed off on my arrest warrant. But there's only one problem with all of that. Is when I got bonded out of jail, I examined the arrest warrant. And there is one word that Detective Tim Waldron wrote in the arrest warrant affidavit that stuck out like a sore thumb. When he was referencing the verbiage of the control email, the one that legitimately was supposed to be verifiable as having come from me from an old Gmail account, not from Proton, from Gmail. He wrote this one word in the arrest warrant affidavit as being one of the words that was a part of what's supposed to be the control email, the verifiable email that came from an old Gmail account of mine. And that word is, and anyone can see it in the arrest warrant affidavit, that word is derealization. The word is derealization, to derealize. Basically the reverse of realization. It's kind of ironic that my ex-partner chose to forge an email using a word that basically means to not know, to derealize. Because I did the exact opposite when I saw this arrest warrant affidavit. I didn't derealize, I realized that I never have ever in my entire life used the word derealization. And it took me a few months to realize what actually happened. What my ex-partner did when Tim Waldron from Georgia tells her in New York, hey, just forward me an old email, and if the words match the Proton stuff, then I can go to a judge and do X, Y, and Z. I can get the warrant. So what did my slick ex-partner do? She did indeed go to the one of few emails that we had exchanged. Because mind you, like, I'm not stupid. I remember also when me and my ex-partner were together, we barely ever emailed. How many people would say that they're in a relationship with someone and you send each other emails? No, you don't send each other emails. We texted each other. That's how you communicate. One-off times there might have been an email 1 or 2, maybe 3, 4 times, but that's it. So there's barely any control email to even look for when Tim Waldron came up with this novel idea on how to get the warrant. But I realized what she did. She indeed went to a legitimate old email of mine, from an old Gmail account of mine, no longer even working. She hit the forward button and she changed the words. She came up with this entire verbiage. My ex-partner is an English major. She was an English major in college. She's a writer. She knows how to write. She wrote for her school newspaper. Okay? She's a professional writer. And boy, oh boy, did she professionally write a forgery pretending to be me. When she did extra credit by after she hit the forward button on a legitimate email, she removed the original contents of what I wrote and wrote things on my behalf for me to match the stuff with the proton mail stuff. In that one instance, to try to get me arrested for literally nothing, or what she felt was something, for what she thought what she was doing was something like sticking it to me, in order for the warrant to appear as legitimate, by her switching out the words of the control email and writing new verbiage to match with the proton mail stuff. She committed identity theft, pretending to be me, felony. She also submitted falsified evidence, tampering with evidence, another felony. I think, depending on where it's at, sometimes felony, sometimes misdemeanor. I don't know. I don't even think it's a misdemeanor anywhere. And she lied to police, to Dunwoody Police, about the whole thing. Because at that point, what is the worth and the weight of her original complaint from New York to Dunwoody if her intention was a willingness to submit falsified evidence to try to make a warrant stick on my arrest? So I'm thinking maybe up to 3 charges, but definitely 2. Identity theft, impersonating me, and tampering with evidence. Now, what does that leave for Tim Waldron? Did he knowingly allow her? Or did he just play dumb and not know that he didn't submit a vetted piece of evidence? Either way, when it would have come in trial, it would have looked really stupid on the part of Tim Waldron and my ex-partner. She would have then immediately been opened to being charged with a crime. And Tim Waldron would then be investigated on whether he willingly submitted forged evidence to have me arrested. Obviously, he would have potentially risked losing his job. And obviously, this would all have led to a very, very expensive false arrest lawsuit. That when the members of the community, the citizens of Dunwoody, would have found this out, this would have been the last straw that broke the camel's back. After so many previous scandals that have nothing to do with me, after so many lawsuits that have nothing to do with me with previous officers, and the previous indications that people have already in the community of Dunwoody asked Chief Billy Grogan to step down because of all the corruption and all the scandals and all this other lawsuits that they have to fit the bill for. They knew by 2021 that I figured out that the evidence that they used to have me arrested, acting under the color of law, because they could have run a much better investigation. They could have even contacted me. They didn't do anything. They literally just let my ex-partner from New York send him whatever she wanted to, and they passed it off as vetted. What he should have done is he should have just actually had, if he was really like legit about the investigation, Tim Waldron, what he should have done is that he should have just simply asked my ex-partner to just walk her way into the lobby of her own New York Police Department and logged in to where the control email of mine allegedly is, so that a New York officer who is unbiased would be able to view that the electronic email that's about to be forwarded to Tim Waldron to Georgia from New York was not tampered with. There was no authenticator in New York that was used to make sure that before the send button is hit, that nothing was altered when the forward button was hit first to allow the email to be altered. Not only that, he could have even sent a subpoena to Google and said, hey, I need authentication that the words of this Gmail email is actually what's sitting on your servers, Google, because we're working on a case that's entirely dependent on the authenticity of what's written inside of an email. And it's a big deal because it's riding on a felony case. So once again, the track record of the Dunwoody Police is one where if the chief of police runs botched investigations on his senior lieutenant asking for nudes of junior officers, I mean, if the chief of police can run botched investigations, then surely so can the detectives who report to him. And the adding to insult to injury is, how dare I find out about this? How dare I find out? How dare I find out that they falsely arrested me? You know what they need to do now that they figured out that they falsely arrested me? They know what they'll do. They'll just make a 10 times bigger case. Not only will they make a 10 times bigger case, but they'll lie even harder to the DeKalb system. They'll lie even harder to DeKalb judges. They'll lie even harder to the DA. They'll tell the DA, look, we got a bigger case on Ronen. Can we put the first case on the back burner? What they didn't tell the DA is that they're manipulating, deceiving the DA in the courts to give them more time for a frame job to work. And so the next slide here shows the crazy thing that I was entrapped into. This triangulation that could have only taken place if the more powerful point of this triangle was as corrupt as everybody else. The only way that this could have happened is if a corrupt police department was running the show. I had 3 points around me. And when I found out that I could prove that I was falsely arrested, I didn't have any more 3 points around me. But the Dunwoody Police was going to make sure that it becomes much more engulfing around me than just 3 points when they roped in, deceived, and lured more and more and more people into the charade that became the frame job. See everybody in the next video.